everybody to Lisa's Care Connection. We're so happy that you could join us today. I would like to introduce you to Carol Pilkington, who is first and foremost a teacher of life and what it means to be human. We accumulate a multitude of hurts the longer we live, which includes the many losses and all types that keep us in the stage of grief, but more accurately in a state of suffering. Carol shows people how to lift themselves up out of suffering into a life of joy, love, and grace. Carol is incredibly trustworthy and is a genuinely good listener. She is able to draw out one's fears, hidden emotions without judgment, and provides practical solutions and tools to stay present in the moment and to observe what triggers actions and emotions at the time they're happening in order to make life clearer and more conscious choices. Thank you for joining us today, Carol.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm really delighted to be here. So, without further ado, so what we're going to be talking about today is how to work with our grief. We put in the title coping, but I, from my own personal experience, feel that we can go beyond coping, that we can actually live a life of joy and grace, as Allison mentioned in my introduction, that goes beyond just coping. Oftentimes we get in such a rut after so many losses that we feel like this is the way life has to be. But there is another way. So grief is a singular experience for each human being, and there is no one size fits all. There is a lot of talk out there that there are 7 stages of grief, but actually what it is 7 stages of dying. And so there is no linear way of grieving. And I'm sure that if you look into your own lives, you might come to the same conclusion. You didn't necessarily feel anger, that you didn't necessarily feel sadness at one period and then jump to another period of anger and all these other things that are talked about with regards to stages. Nothing is linear. Nothing in life is linear. So acceptance of yourself will enable you to move out of the isolation that grief and sorrow and all of these losses that we're going to be talking about today is really paramount. And we'll go more into that as we go through these. But what I want to do right now is briefly have you talk about your own personal responses to loss and grief. So right off the bat, as Allison knows me, I really love the interaction of the audience because it's only through interaction that we get in touch with what we are ourselves experiencing and dealing with, as well as when we share with others. It helps to let others know that they're not alone and that they're not isolated. That's another part of talking about things, is to know that we really aren't as isolated as we believe ourselves to be. So if we could get some feedback, how you respond to loss, how you respond to grief in your life. All right, so what to do? Give yourself time. We live in a culture where once we have a loss, we lose somebody or something happens in our life that causes us to feel a deep loss of a relationship, status, a long career, anything that includes having to work out what we're feeling about any incident or event that's happening in our lives. we don't give ourselves enough time to process it. And when we don't process grief, it becomes suffering. And so that's how I make the distinction between grief and suffering. There is inevitably going to be pain in all of our lives. It's how we deal with it and how we process it that makes all the difference in the world of how we proceed in our life. So it's important to give yourself time and select a trusted partner or professional that can help you work through the process, and take care of yourself physically. When we stay bottled up and isolated in our homes and we don't get out into the world, it really affects us physically. So get out of the house, write a letter to your loved one that you might have lost. It sometimes helps get the feelings and emotions and thoughts out of our head and out of our body, actually, and onto paper, or however you would like to do it. You can journal. There are a lot of people that get a lot of satisfaction and release from journaling. Allow yourself to cry. Every human being should have permission and grant themselves permission to cry. We live in a society where we are told to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and emotions are weak, especially for men. And I think that's such a terrible, terrible stigma to place on men, on any human being. And be gentle with yourself. Be so kind to yourself. If you saw someone else suffering and grieving, you would be kind to them, and you should allow yourself the same process. Isolate when you need to. That doesn't mean that you have to be out there all the time and wearing your heart on your sleeve. There is a time for quiet, stillness, and reflection, and that does include isolating, but oftentimes we consider isolation to be a bad thing. You know, it's a kind of a paradox, if you will. We have to find a balance to where we're recognizing how we're feeling and allow those feelings to arise. And sometimes we just need to be alone to be able to process that stuff. And that's really paramount. And there's a wonderful website called ourhouse-grief.org. And it has a lot of different resources on there, and places to go. So I just wanted you to have that in mind as well. Okay, so what not to do. Don't make yourself wrong. Don't move. Emotions get stored in your muscles and body. Movement and exercise help. Don't isolate too much. Know when to reach out. These are the things that are really important to keep in mind as we're going through any kind of process, any kind of loss. And life is worth living. You know, grief is not a lifetime sentence. The more real we make death, the more real we make life. We live in a world where we're always looking at tomorrow. I need to go there. I need to be there. We're always looking so far ahead that we don't give ourselves the opportunity to be where we are now. And that's really important, to really see where we are and allow and accept where we are in any given moment. Embracing new freedom without guilt or shame. A lot of people feel when they're going through a grieving process that they are feeling guilty or shamed because everybody is out there living their life. Why shouldn't I be? What's wrong with me? I haven't gotten over this yet. These are the kind of societal stigmas that are placed on us when we're having a hard time working through, or not even giving ourselves an opportunity to work through the feelings and emotions that we have about anything that's going on in our lives. And we don't have to be defined by our past. Memory has its place. So with regards to losing a loved one, we often feel that we have to be in a high emotional state or guilt ourselves for not remembering how somebody's voice sounded, or a particular loving look that they might have given, or something else that reminded them of a loved one before. We will never forget how they made us feel. And so we don't need to be defined by the past, because when we carry all of our past with us, and this is in anything that happens in our lives, when we carry our past with us, it's like carrying a 3-ton bag of rocks. And that's not to diminish those memories. They're always there to be recalled. And we have to give ourselves permission to live in the present moment, to be with the people that are in our lives now, and to make the most of the now. That doesn't mean that we forget and we forget the past and we don't use the past. Memory has its place, but we also have to live for now as well. So I wanted to stop this for a moment and see where we are with everybody. And if you could please share with me what you're experiencing and your experience of the whole process of how you feel about grief and loss, and how you process it.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you vaguely, but I'll put up my sound so I can hear you more. Okay.
Yeah, you couldn't hear us last time. That's why nobody talked.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't hear you at all.
I'll ask you this. Do you think there's a difference between, let's say, having a mother, father, wife die and treat a person that is dying slowly for 15 years?
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to recognize that there is a grief process going on while one is taking care of a loved one that is in the process of an illness, and then possibly, moving into the terminal status and dying, or has just got a very long-term illness and it has been a long-term caregiver for that amount of time. There is a grieving process, and it's necessary to be acknowledged and to take a look at what the grief is about. Is it about the pending loss of the person? Is it about the grief of the life that you are not living yourself? And that has to be validated as well. And no guilt can be associated with that, or else it's much more difficult to live and be present to the person that one is caring for at the moment. And so I think that there can be a distinction made in the grieving process of once parents or a loved one has passed, and grief while the person is alive and going through an illness. The grief still needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be talked about, and it needs an outlet. It absolutely needs an outlet. And the more we allow ourselves to express it and work through it, the more present we can be with the people that we're taking care of now.
I I like to appreciate the role of the hospice. Hospice is playing a great role in shortening your grief and the grief of the patient also. When it is established that the life is not going to be too long, so they stop giving you the food, they put you on the medicine so that you do not suffer the pain, and it works out excellently. At one time, people used to commit suicide in order to shorten the process, but I think hospice is legal, it's practiced, and it is playing a great role. Will you please give a little bit more information to the public on that one?
Hospice is an incredibly wonderful and beautiful service that is available. The compassion that is so selfless is amazing. And the fact that it's paid by Medicare is a gift, and hospice in itself is a gift. It takes so much stamina and awareness to be able to give oneself fully to that process with another. I think it's a beautiful service. Did I answer your question? I'm trying to hear as best as I can.
Yeah, I think you did it well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
As you were saying just what you did about hospice, it came to my mind because I'm just started on it. And I agree with what you're saying, wow. But what I'm starting to realize is it's a lot like a support group where you can share, and you're sharing with somebody that says, I understand, or I know, or here's the answer. And yeah, I mean, that's like you said, boy, once you get them on that, it's like a different lifestyle. It doesn't change the grieving or anything, but it gives you the opportunity to dump some of the stuff that particularly men can't show. It's very difficult for us to show. I sometimes think it's in the adrenaline that's given to us because we used to fight wild animals and all that, so we can't show our emotions. We have to handle things with our muscles. And where a woman has compassion, she has love, she's nurturer, and so a woman has a gift of able to dump this stuff off through crying. And it really does do that in my life. I've only cried twice, and one was just recently when they said my wife was approved for hospice. I had no idea this was going to happen. I started weeping because I knew what it did for other people. And then I tried to call family and tell them I was weeping the whole time and laughing at myself for doing it.
Carol, I wanted to say something related to that. I just lost my husband. I just lost my husband about 6 or 7 weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
After being together for over 40 years. But when we were younger and my husband was dealing with severe PTSD from Vietnam, he used to tell me, it's beautiful that you can cry. I can't anymore because of what I've seen and done and gone through. And at that time, I didn't know what he meant because I've always been an emotional person. But in suffering with him through his debilitating injury recently before his loss, I started crying at different stages as we realized losses of things. I realized that he was never going to get off a ventilator and I'd never hear his voice again. And it burst me into tears. But when he passed, I couldn't cry. I just couldn't cry because I was so relieved for him that he was no longer suffering. And it was like that burden of relief being released made it almost impossible for me to cry at that point. And what helped me bring that back and start expressing that at this stage, I was doing some research for a memorial for him that I'm going to do virtually for family, since we were both concerned about the effects of COVID. I didn't want to gather the family together and possibly expose so many people to so many things for so many reasons. And I was going through various things trying to find a memorial for him. And I ran into a poem song by an Australian talking about him going off to Vietnam, and he was only 19. And somehow that touched me in such a way and allowed that feeling that I needed to express in tears, but hadn't been able to until this stage. So sometimes I found that a movie or a touching song sometimes helps get to that stage where you can actually release the crying because you've suppressed it in this little box for so long. And another thing that I'd found just a few days later was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. One of the things that they had done was they had rung a bell, and that bell, some people don't understand it, but there are sounds that allows your body reactions.
Yes.
That you know, there are notes that allows grief. There are notes that brings joy. So if you can find those things that help resonate for you and help you release, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. And the last thing I'll say on that was my husband was adamantly against having taps played at his service because for him, it was just unbearable. But you find that the notes that are played are designed to open your heart and allow that grief to come out. So it's an interesting, powerful piece of music.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's true. Sometimes we need a catalyst to help us tap into the feelings and emotions in order to be able to release them. And I think that's so true. And I'm glad that you found that. It reminds me of my father years ago. He was the Sergeant at Arms of the American Legion chapter in our small town. And we would celebrate Veterans Day, and the lights would be totally out. He would be at a podium with the light shining on the podium. And there's a, I don't know if it's a poem or not, but it's called the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. You might want to Google that, and talks about that and what it meant and what it is with regards to veterans. And it was striking, moving, haunting, and there was never, ever, ever a dry eye in the place when he recited that and read it. So it was a catalyst for people to be in community with one another and allow for a whole group of people to be able to feel and release the emotions around death and dying, especially for these veterans, which is what this was for. So I can really appreciate what you're saying. It's really quite moving.
I like to bring one more thing.
Yes.
The whole country called United States is a follower of Christianity. And I have almost known from many, many people that the place that we are in, this earth is not our residence. Our residence is with the good Lord. So when somebody is going to the good Lord, he or she should be very excited that, hey, finally I am going home. And the people who are around them, they should give them the full encouragement and say, hey, I am glad you are going. I will be following you soon. So look out for me, etc. Instead, we are all crying. We are all following. What is the use of knowing the book, going to the church every Sunday, listening to the sermons and calling ourselves religious? And when it comes to practice, we just become the people of the world and make the life even unbearable to the neighbors. How do you love your neighbor now? When you are crying, the neighbor crying also. So I'm very, very confused about it. I am a Hindu. Please bear with me and tell me what is the right behavior according to you.
Didn't hear that last question. Can somebody repeat it for me, or can you repeat it for me?
The question was, what is the right behavior? Should we cry or should we say with joy that, hey, we have found now the right solution to the right problem, the death?
Well, I think that my way of supporting another, and I hope this is answering your question, you can tell me if it's not. A lot of times we don't even know how to support another in their grief. And so I have found that I ask, how would you feel supported in your time of loss, in your time of sorrow? This way we don't take it upon ourselves to assume that we know how another is feeling. We don't take it upon ourselves to assume that another person would be grieving the same way we would. But it also it gives them the dignity to even come up with an answer that they might not have even thought of to have an answer to. How would I want to be supported? How would you want to be supported in your grief, in your time of sorrow? It's a perfectly valid question to ask, and it is so respectful of recognizing that another person is grieving, that they are in sorrow, and that you respect and want to be there to support them in whatever way support appears and feels like to them. Does that answer your question?
No, ma'am, it looks like that. Are you advising people to be politically correct? In other words, ask them what I think that as a whole society, as the follower of the right idea, we should not be grieving too much, but rather be enthusiastic that the event is not as bad as we were thinking.
Well, I don't want to necessarily get into politics too much. Everybody has their own belief systems, and as best we can, it's important to allow oneself to believe whatever they believe, whether they're Christians, Hindus, Muslim, or anything else. Respect and honor each one's belief systems, and not get into an argument. If you know, we oftentimes tend to want to try and convince another on how their perspectives are, and instead of just pure listening to another. And if one doesn't agree, then just say, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and not go back and forth and banter about convincing one or the other about what's right or what's wrong, or what we should or shouldn't do. Everybody's going to carry out their lives according to their own belief systems. And I think this is where some of the challenges comes in to our society, where we're trying to change one another and trying to convince one another of one perspective or another. And if we allow ourselves to just be with one another as best we can, and, you know, there are going to be times when we can't tolerate something that another says or another believes. So we have to also honor that within ourselves as well, and meet people wherever they are. When we allow ourselves to meet each other where we are, and not try to push or pull or sway one another in any given direction, the temperature goes down and the defenses kind of release a little bit.
Very well said. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
I think it's possible to be happy that a person is in a better place or has stopped suffering, but it's still a personal loss to you, and you still have to decide what you're going to do for the rest of your future. You know, there's so many changes that have to be made, and so you go through something because of the loss, even though you might be happy that the other person is no longer suffering.
Yes.
And every,
Yes.
I have something to say. That I lost my husband, so I can say that going through grief is a personal thing. It's very hard to cope with it. That's one. The other is when you have family and friends that want to support you, and they don't know how to support you. Many times, if they're just with you, that's all you need, is to have them there personally. They don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything, but the feeling is there and the love.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And it's not a wrong thing to say, this is how you can support me. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to do anything, but you're just being here really is supportive to me. You can actually tell people how you need to be supported and what their comfort for you looks like. Don't be afraid to do that. And yes, I totally understand. A lot of people might put a guilt trip on one when they hear a person say, I'm really relieved that they've gone to another place, that their suffering is that there's no longer suffering. There is no guilt or shame in that. You really are caring for another person that has passed on. They are no longer suffering. But the other side of that goes unsaid, and where guilt and shame might come in, is that you have been freed up to live your life now. a lot of times that goes unacknowledged when we allow ourselves to say, I'm relieved that that person's gone. There's two sides of that. There's relief for yourself and there's relief for another. And there is no shame and there should be absolutely no guilt for you to be able to begin to live your life whenever you feel you can. And so that's part of the process as well. We live in a society where we think that we have to carry the guilt and shame of our wanting to be able to live and continue on our life, that we should feel guilt and shame about that. These are the taboos that aren't spoken about so very often.
One of the support groups, when we were talking about this subject, the person said, I feel grief and relief. And that really stuck with me, grief and relief, because I think you really do feel both those, and you can do it like you said. You shouldn't be ashamed, because particularly if you've been caring for somebody a long, long time, you're going to feel some relief. But then there's that emptiness that are not there anymore. And so I've just plugged that into my long-term care memory, so I can remember that, because that really, every time I start thinking about it, for me, I said grief and relief. Okay, you're going to go through that process. Oh, I did want to say this. There was a friend of mine that lost his wife, and he was a career Marine, an all man and everything like that. And of course, we wanted to help him through his grief. He told us, leave me alone for a while. Don't call me, don't do anything. So we said, if that's what you want. So that was his way of being able to grieve without having to share it with anybody else. So
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that phrase, grief and relief, because it's so true and so real, and we have to allow ourselves that. That's excellent. Thank you. There's a wonderful book that I have, and I think I put it away, but I have it on the screen, so I'm going to share my screen. There's a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Frances Weller. It's a beautiful book. It's got some excellent poems in there, but it's not all poems. It's really a book about how to go through the grieving process. And a lot of what I've spoken about is in there. And then Walking Each Other Home, Conversations on Loving and Dying by Ram Dass. Have any of you ever heard of Ram Dass? I know that the Hindu gentleman might have, and Mirabai Bush. He was the original author of Be Here Now. And it's a phenomenal book because he talks about, with his good friend Mirabai, about his own process of dying while he was in that process. And he only died a couple of years ago. And he wrote the book just about a year before he died. And it's really quite illuminating. And one of the things that he did say, what I mentioned before, is that the more real we make death, the more real we make life. And what that means is that we don't acknowledge oftentimes the impermanence of life and how precious each and every moment is. And if we kept death close to us, life would be more alive, more real. I wanted to stop the sharing just the screen sharing just one more time to see if anyone else had anything else to share and talk about, because this is really wonderful what you're sharing, and I really appreciate it.
I'll share something. In 2018, my third son, I had 4 sons, and my third son committed suicide. If I live to be 300 years old, I'll never get over it. I grieve for him every day of my life. His second, he had 2 daughters, and the second one's expecting her first child, 1st of November, somewhere between around the 11th. But he was, of my 4 sons, he was the runt of the litter, but he grew up to be the gentle giant and outgrew everybody, including his dad. As I said, if I live to be 300, I will never quit grieving for him, because everybody loved him. 450 people attended his memorial service at Dunbar's, and they had to turn people away. That is a testimony to how well he was thought of and how much he was loved by his peers and friends. So I'm 88 years old now, and I'm staring 90 in the face and don't know when my day's gonna come. But I'll continue to grieve for him, because he really, really was a love. Y'all remember me, because I need it.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry for your loss. In that grief, can you find some joy in the fact that he brought so much to you and the people around him?
I find it in that, and I find it in the fact that his dad, who was in hospice at the time, never knew it.
Yeah.
I lost my son on January the 4th, 2018, and my husband died early on the 6th of January. And he never knew it. But grief is really hard, and especially in the fact that he had so much to live for. But his last words to me were, "Mama, my retirement pay is just nothing. I'm going to lose everything I have." And he was kind of being forced into retirement from Scanner. He worked at BC Summer Plant.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I can't have those deep feelings that you have, because I hadn't lost a child yet. But I have seen in one of our support groups and some of the people that come here, a man that is taking care of his wife, and he's one of these really neat guys that can weep a little bit when he's telling you about these things. But then his son dies. Now he's got all this stress on him, and his son dies. Now that's at least doubled. That stress put him in the hospital. I didn't know stress could do that, but he had some physical problems. He was in the hospital for about a month before they got all that straightened out. So to me, taking care of your loved one is one thing, but losing a child, I think, can be even worse. It's unnatural. They're supposed to be burying you. You're not supposed to be burying them.
Yeah, I understand that belief. And I don't think there's any sure timeline on any of our lives, and the impact that we have on another makes it very real. And I think the important thing that I've learned through my own process of grief is that we never, ever know when our time is up. And it doesn't matter how young or old or where we are in any lineage, that the more we become aware and make real that we're only here for an unspecified amount of time, that we make the most of it. And the more we make the most of it with each and every person in our lives that are important to us, the better we will feel and the more alive we will be with, and more present we will be to each and every moment with whomever we're with. There have been many reports from people that have had out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences that have come back and reported that they recognized and have experienced that they chose the life that they're living, and that they know that they were only going to be here for a particular time, for a particular amount of time, and how they were even going to die. And to me, that gives me comfort. I mean, unconsciously, I don't have any clue when I'm going to die, but I have a sense that I'm going to live a lot longer than I am now. So there's something within me that's telling me that goes beyond Carol Pilkington, this personality sitting here before you. There is the essence of me that has a sense and knowing of something that my conscious mind doesn't know. And I think that there is that within all of us that might go unacknowledged or made aware. We're not, some of us have the ability to know that, some of us don't. All I'm saying is that lineage, and when a child dies before a parent, is very, very sad. And I understand the nature of feeling that the child should not die before the parent. But we just never know when that's going to be. And it's in the acceptance of that can sometimes bring us more comfort. Acceptance is so paramount to being able to live every day and find meaning in our lives beyond a loss or a death. It's so very important, because I don't feel that the people that pass would want us to be in such pain and suffering for the rest of our own lives, our own living lives. I just don't feel that. My mother, when she passed over 40 years ago, she literally told my father to continue his life, to find somebody that he could love again. Now, that conversation that they had was enormous. They'd been married for 34 years. He was a good father. He was a good husband, and they really loved each other. But my mother wanted to make sure that he did not grieve the rest of his life, that he did not live alone and did not have love again. And while those conversations don't take place every day, doesn't necessarily mean that the person that's dying doesn't want that for their loved one. I don't I can't imagine that any loved one that is dying doesn't want that for the person that lives on. And that includes the children of our parents. My perception is that they don't want us to mourn them for the rest of our lives, that we should suffer for the rest of our lives. So we need to give ourselves permission to be able to live and live in joy.
Ma'am, I'd like to bring up the COVID-19 phenomenon that is there in front of us. All of us had certain ways of living, believing, this happens, that happens. We were all keeping on repeating the same thing over and over. And with one stroke, the Almighty showed the power and He said, look, nothing is in your control. Worldwide, we are all the same. We should believe in the right things. And if we don't have your neighbor today, tomorrow will be too late. This is a wonderful phenomenon according to me. Wonderful in the sense, it is said, no doubt about it. But when are we going to learn? We don't learn willingly. We are just going back and forth. Will you kindly comment on it?
I'm trying to understand what you said, but let me see if I can put it in a way that I think I heard you say. I think I heard you say that we should appreciate the fact that tomorrow, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so that we should make the most of our day, kind of continuing on the thread that we were talking about before with regards to being able to meet one another where they are. But by the same token, not allowing where another is to affect where we are. So if we're happy, and another around us is not, we can respect and honor where they are, but we also have to honor our own joy and our own happiness and our own perspective about where we are in life. That can have an actual impact on another in and of itself when we continue to honor where we are. So it's not just about honoring where another is, it's about honoring where we are as well. I hope I commented appropriately to what you were saying.
I'd like to add to what you just said because it really hit me good. I like to see the good in everything I can possibly do, okay? And when you're caring for somebody over a number of years that's got Alzheimer's, you know where it's all heading and everything. It's hard to find good. But what I finally got the inspiration of, you are so lucky because you will be able to do all the things that you'll never say, I wish I had. I wish I had done this for him. Now you can do it. And I've heard other people say, well, I wish I kind of had done this, not caused to this trouble, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, it makes me feel good in a certain way, that I'm still able to show her how I love her through a lot of different ways.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's true. We have to honor and be grateful for where we are as well, because that can impact another just as much. When we live by example, just by living our lives and being who we are, we impact another whether we realize it or not. Well, thank you, everyone. I really so appreciate your participation and sharing and being so very open with me. It's really been quite wonderful.
Carol, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave these resources up on the screen for a bit, and we can also email them to our viewers and those in our South Carolina location if you would like. Thank you for an incredible discussion. Thank you to everyone in South Carolina who joined us. This is an incredibly difficult topic, and your candor and honesty has really been a gift to us. So we thank you.
Yes, thank you.